Well, good morning, folks. Well, it's morning over in Houston anyway, and welcome to the next in the series of our tier preparedness and response webinar series for all spill response. And today we're going to be looking at the topic of in situ controlled burning. But before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. My name's Tristan Barston. I'm a senior consultant in OSRL's Houston Technical Office as part of the Americas team. As we go through the webinar this morning, if you have any questions, we'll be taking questions at the end. But if you look in your top right-hand corner, you'll see a little question and answers box, logo, symbol. Just click on that, write your questions in the chat as we go through, and we will come to them at the end. Okay. So the tiered preparedness and response webinar series, we're going to look at these 15 capabilities, which, as it says on the screen there, represent the scope of tiered preparedness and response. So these are the tools that we have in our toolbox to respond to and mitigate the negative impacts resulting from an oil spill. So these are tools that we can choose from. Not all are going to be applicable for us, and not all are going to be able to deal with the incident by themselves. In fact, I would argue that there is not one of these particular elements that is a magic silver bullet to respond to an incident. It's all part of a process where we choose the best response strategies depending on the incident we face. And tying this all together is our incident management system, or over here in the US, it's typically called our incident command system. And that's the team of experts that direct and manage the response to the incident using the tools available to them. So as you can see, each individual segment, each individual 15 piece of the pie is split into 3 color-coded areas. The darker blue towards the center is our tier 1. As it says on the screen, these are resources that we have immediately to hand. These are resources that we can access quickly and then have the capability to deploy. So we have trained staff. Not only do we have the equipment, but then we also have the logistical infrastructure to deploy, run, and recover those resources to us without having to go out for additional help. Tier 2 is the next step on from that. These are, as it says, national or regional resources. Typically, you would get tier 2 resources through mutual aid agreements, for example, where other organisations, other parties, perhaps even commercial oil spill response organisations in the country that you operate can come in and assist for larger scale incidents, or where your tier 1 resources are being overwhelmed. And then last but not least, you have tier 3. So this is the lighter blue-grey segment at the edge of our tiered circle. So these are our international response resources. This is where we get the larger equipment, resources, the specialist skills that we would bring into a region to deal with a complex or a high potential spill. So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is in situ controlled burning? We've all seen the pictures, we've all seen the photos. What does it actually mean? So as it says on the screen, in situ controlled burning, commonly written as ISB, is the term that we use when we're describing an operation of burning spilt oil. burning the spilt oil rather than it going through the waste management process. This is where we're doing it at or very close to the location where it was spilt. But again, it's very, very important to say that the controlled burning is absolutely done in a careful, monitored and fully supervised manner. And that's one of the things that I want you to take away from this webinar series. We don't just wake up in the morning, have an oil spill and decide to set fire to it. There is a raft of decision-making processes that we have to go through before we reach the decision to use in situ controlled burning. And actually, it's not the oil itself that burns. It's the vapors, the flammable vapors that come off the oil that are the things that ignite. So to be able to do that, we obviously need to gather the oil together, contain the oil, and then have an ignition source. When we think about responding to incidents, in situ burning or burning of oil is actually one of the hazards that we face as responders when we are responding to incidents, because there are many response techniques that require us to contain the oil, to corral the oil, to gather it before we recover it. And once we do that, the risk of accidental ignition increases exponentially. But like I said, we don't just wake up in the morning, have an oil spill and say, okay, we're going to set fire to it. There's a process that we go through. And the process starts on the left-hand side with planning and training, long before we have an incident, long before perhaps we are actually doing the operation that has the potential to cause an oil spill. We look at our situation, we look at the operation that we're carrying out, we look at the area that we're operating in, and we start to build a response strategy that could include in situ burning. Then, if the spill occurs, the second box in from the left-hand side there, we are prepared. We have done our due diligence. We can decide, using a process that we'll come onto on the next slide, is in situ burning the best option for us in this case? If it is, then we will go into the activities required, which is contain the oil, ignite the oil. Once the oil has burnt as much as possible, we'll extinguish the burn. And then vital to all of this is that last box, this recording and reporting. How effective was it? What were the positive outcomes? What were the negative outcomes? And this will drive the decision, shall we do it again if need be? So it's a step-by-step process. So the planning and preparedness aspect, and as it says on the screen, an absolute key element of determining if you want to use in situ burning. In fact, an absolute key element if you want to use any of the 15 response techniques available to us on that tiered preparedness and response wheel is the need for us to do a net environmental benefit analysis or spill mitigation assessment. And what we are doing is we are looking at the risks that we face, the oil spill scenarios. What's the worst thing that can happen to us at our location during our operation? And for that, we use things like fate and trajectory modeling. We look at the resources at risk, the environment around us, the socio-economic activities around us. And from that, we can determine the feasible response options, what will work, what is applicable, what doesn't work. We can predict the outcomes. What if we just are able to not actively recover or respond to the incident? What if we can just monitor, evaluate, and let it naturally be reabsorbed back into the environment? Is that an option? If it's not, then we build upon that. using the response tools available to us. And one of those is in situ burning. And as I said at the start, we do not have a silver bullet when it comes to any of these response techniques. There are pros and cons to everything, and we need to balance those trade-offs. What are the benefits of us using this scenario? What are the negative aspects of using this scenario, this response technique, this in situ burning? Once we've done that for all of our response options, we would then choose the best response strategy. And actually, I would argue it wouldn't just be one. There'd be a range that we would use. And it's that combination of techniques that we will use to minimize the damage that could be caused to the environment, to the socio-economic activities. And we want to get back to normal, promote that rapid recovery and get that location back to normal as quickly as possible by using every tool that we have available to us. So as I said, there's pros and cons to every response technique, and in situ burning is absolutely no different. You can see on the left-hand side, there's some very big advantages of using in situ controlled burning. So it's high efficiency oil removal rates from water, land or ice. It means we can use it in a wide variety of environments, and it does remove oil, the liquid oil, from that area rapidly. Less equipment, less labor intensive. Obviously, you know, we are burning the oil, so there is less for us to recover. So we don't need as much logistical infrastructure for this response technique as we could, for example, containment and recovery. And we can go through the list there. There's a number of other things. We can do it at night. Obviously, that takes a lot more planning. Again, this is not something we would just decide to do on a whim. But one of the big things that I've seen, especially when I was deployed in places like Libya, it can be applied in remote areas where other methods cannot be used, when the logistics of getting equipment into a particular area are so complex. Then in situ burning is a good option. It is something that we can do with very little resources. But obviously, again, you have to think, if it's difficult for us to get equipment into that area, how are we going to effectively control that burn? And then there's obviously disadvantages. We've got to be able to contain that oil, and it's got to be the right oil type as well. But one of the big things is that residue or unburned oil might need to be recovered. Obviously, with the light ends that burn off, the residue could be thick enough to smother or coat the environment, the living creatures in that area, so it could sink. And again, there's a very visible smoke plume, and it requires significant pre-planning and approval from the regulatory authorities and agencies. We have to make sure that that smoke that's coming from the burning oil is not negatively impacting the environment around us. So obviously there's a lot of public, and I would argue private, the organizations that want to carry out these operations, we have concerns about the negative impacts of in situ burning. We want to mitigate those risks as much as possible. And there's others on the list there, might not be appropriate close to populated areas, and there is again a risk of fire spreading to other areas. So it's got to be managed very effectively, very carefully. I spoke about this quickly on the previous slide. When we're thinking about using an in situ burn operation, one of the things that we have to think about is the type of oil that we are responding to. Obviously, things, the light products, the gasoline, the diesel, diesel fuel, the light crude oil. These burn very easily, which means that the efficiency of our burn is very high. As you can see with gasoline, it says 95 to 99% of the spilt product will burn off. But then at the other end of the scale, when we're looking at things like bitumen and some used oil types, they're very difficult to ignite. And if we do get them to ignite, then the efficiency of the burn can be very low. Again, this is something we would look at when we're going through our planning process. Are our activities, are our operations going to result in a spill where in situ burning is going to be effective for us? So when can we consider implementing or using an in situ burn operation? I'm not just going to read these, you can come back and read the wording on the screen there. But as I said right at the beginning, one of the benefits of our in situ burning operation, our controlled burning, is it can be used in a wide variety of environments. And here we've got examples on land, on water, and on ice and snow. Obviously, the different areas have different challenges when we are responding to the incident, and they need to be looked at prior to us starting this operation. One of the things you'll see, especially for the land and water spills, is in situ burning is very time critical. We want to use it before those light ends, before the oil has had a chance to weather and those light ends have evaporated off. So we want to be able to utilize in situ burning as early as possible. And again, this requires a lot of pre-planning for the operation. And although I said that logistically, in situ burning, a controlled burn, is a lighter or requires less resources than things like containment and recovery, we still do require some. Now, obviously, we need to be able to contain the oil. We need to be able to hold it in an area where it's thick enough to provide those vapors that we need to start ignition. So on land, we can use things like dikes, underflow dams, trenches and pits, and also use the natural environment or enhance those natural barriers that are out there. Again, this comes down to your pre-planning. You look at the environment, you look at the area that you're operating in. You look where there's natural collection points, for example, and then start planning. In the event of an incident and the oil goes here, this is what we could do. On water, again, there's several types of oil, of in situ burning boom available to us. They all basically do the same thing, which is they all contain the oil in an area so we can ignite it. So thick enough in an area so we can ignite it. There's also herding agents, which are chemicals applied to the surface of the water along the perimeter of the slick, as it's said here. To be honest, I was a little bit skeptical about these, and then I saw a demonstration of them, and they were remarkably effective. They really were. Obviously, they're not a silver bullet. They're not applicable, or they wouldn't be used in all environments, but in the area that I observed them being used, they were incredibly effective. It was quite eye-opening. And then last but not least, on ice and snow. One of the benefits of operating in ice and snow conditions when responding to an incident is the cold weather actually slows down that weathering process, gives you a little bit more time. And as it says there, oiled snow can be collected, brought into piles and then burned. We have a number of resources available to us to find oil trapped under ice. One of these are the dogs, the spill detection dogs. As a keen dog rescuer myself, I love that aspect of the spill response services that Oil Spill Response provide. So we can find oil underneath the ice, obviously access that oil and then burn it in situ. So The first resource that we need is an ability to contain that oil. The second resource that we need, obviously, is a method to ignite it, to set fire to the actual vapors coming off that oil. Many of the ignition systems, as it says, can be used across the three areas that we would typically respond to. Ones, again, I've seen is ignition torches, either used from a helicopter or a vessel. I've actually never seen the helicopter used in anger, but I have seen the vessel based ignition system used in anger, and they work again very, very well. One of the key elements to it, though, is you do have to have trained personnel. We are setting fire to something in the middle of the sea. We don't just send out Dave, drag him out the bag, stick him on a boat with a bucket full of oily rags and send him out there. It is something that you need training on. It sounds like it's easy. We've all been kids and we've all lit bonfires. We know how to set fire to things, or at least I do. But when we are responding to incidents like this, training and pre-planning is absolutely key. But regardless of the method that we chose, each type of ignition device should be, as it says there, capable of supplying a reliable heat source. Sometimes oil, when we're responding in different environments, takes a long time to catch. And last, be safe to use, obviously, simple to operate and have a long shelf life. We very, very rarely, touch wood, use in situ burning operations. In fact, I would argue for organizations outside of all spill response, if they have in situ burning or controlled burning resources available to them, they're not used very often. So we want to be able to keep those on standby for as long as possible. So we want equipment that won't degrade. We want to be able to store it and have a long shelf life. So when we come to it, it's ready for us to use. Now, one of the key aspects of this is the monitoring for controlled burning, for in situ burning operations. Obviously, there's fire safety. We are setting fire to something in the environment. We've got to be able to control that fire. We've got to be able to control where it goes. We've got to be able to extinguish it as quickly as possible. We also need to know where everybody is in relation to that fire. How are we monitoring? Not just the people that we know are monitoring the fire, so the responders, but also are there any access to outside personnel? Unfortunately, some humans are like moths when it comes to bright lights and smoke. You see that when you're driving and there's an accident on the other side of the freeway, people will slow down to have a look. If you're not controlling an area, people will come and have a look and see what you're doing. So we've got to be able to control our area that we are carrying out our in situ burning operations. So there is a danger to humans, infrastructure and amenities. We want to be able to control the area. Obviously, fire boom containment integrity. We want to be able to manage our containment operation. We want to make sure that it is up to the task, and if it's not, if it's starting to fail, what are the signs? Again, this comes down to training. The burn effectiveness. Are we using the best response operation? If you remember the steps at the start, the whole recording and reporting, we are taking notes, we are taking readings all through this operation to make sure that what we're doing is the most effective thing. And tied into that are the burn emissions, the smoke. We are monitoring, we're finding what particulates are in there, what chemicals, what is in this smoke, where's it going? And that's a key part of this in situ burning operation. So a quick recap, and I understand I've rattled through this morning. 30 minutes on in-situ burning is useful, but I really hope it's piqued your interest to go and find out more, especially because we are currently in that first plan and train element of the steps. We can go, we can do our research on our operations, on our environment, on the area around us. We don't want to just look at a response technique and dismiss it out of hand without going through the process. Is it effective for us? If it is, why is it? If it's not, why isn't it? And it's only through that due diligence that if there is an incident, that we are prepared, and then we can run a really effective in situ burning operation. As I said, this is just a taster for in situ burning operations. There is a wide variety of excellent resources out there available to you. IPECA have got some great documents, some guidelines there on implementing the SEMA, that Spill Impact Mitigation Assessment. That's absolutely key to this. In fact, you should be doing this for every response option, not just in situ burning. Then there's documents that talk about these operations in more detail. Again, IPECA have an excellent document talking about controlled in situ burning of spilled oil. There's some API technical reports, which are also a great resource. There's here in the US, there's an operational planning tool done by the regional response team. And last but not least, good old spill response. We also provide an in situ burning operations field guide. So a more tactical plan that gives us the key highlights for our response operation when we're underway. So we've reached the end of my presentation this morning. Do we have any questions at all?
We do have a couple of questions, actually, Tristan. The first one is from David, and he's asking, what is the minimum thickness required to enable burning? And also, as the oil burns, does it reduce in thickness and eventually become too thin just to sustain ignition?
Absolutely. Great question, David. Yes, so obviously it depends on oil type, but a general rule of thumb is we're looking between 2 to 4 millimeters is about the minimum thickness of oil that we need. Because obviously when we do burn, especially on water, we've got that cooling effect of the water. So when we set fire to the oil, it will burn off, and as soon as it reaches that minimum thickness where the cooling effect of the water negates the heat of the fire itself, then it will self-extinguish. That normally happens around 1 mil, but again depends strongly on oil type.
Great, thanks. The next one is from James, and he's asking, what is the likelihood of ISB being accepted in Europe? I don't know.
That is an excellent question, now, I haven't faced the challenges of getting and I guess we're talking about pre-approval rather than we've had an incident and then we are going to want to in situ burn. I've faced those challenges in some South American countries, and it all comes down to our ability to show that this is the best response option for this particular scenario that we are facing. I'm not going to lie to you, it's challenging. Very similar to dispersant use, in situ burning has a bad reputation. Sometimes it's been used incorrectly. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's been used incorrectly in the past, and it's not been well thought out. When we go forward, that pre-planning aspect of an in situ burning response is absolutely key. The ability to show categorically that for this particular incident, for this particular scenario, the in situ burning is the right option, I will say will stand us in good stead for pre-approval. But like all these things, there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees. So I'm sorry, that was a really great answer to a great question. You know, due diligence and hope for the best, unfortunately.
I'm not sure you can answer this one, I guess, to the best of your ability. For monitoring, are there requirements for environmental monitoring, for example, wildlife residuals?
Absolutely they are, especially here in the US. You know, there are great guidelines out there from people like Bessie, from people from the Environmental Agency that set minimum standards that they have to reach, especially when we're talking about what's in that plume of smoke, and also the distance from habitations, from people, locations. So here in the US, it's quite an interesting area. So there are some areas that they've designated burn zones. So they have pre-approval. So if you have an oil spill in this area, you can use, obviously, with the proper planning and preparedness, you can use the in-situ burning as a response technique. There's other areas that are grayer, where you really have to be able to prove that this is going to be the best response option in that area. And then there's other areas that are just no. So very similar to all response techniques that we have available to us. There's some areas where it's the best response option. There's others where we would do more harm than good.
I think we have time for one more. We're just kind of going over on time. Does OSRL do ISB training at fire training centers? Do we do ISB training, Tristan?
I guess we are talking about for non-OSRL personnel. So currently, I don't believe we offer that as a course. I know that our responders have had some training, but I don't believe we offer that as an external accessible course. But that is a great question, and probably one that we should raise to the training team.
Right. Yeah. So as I said, we're just running out of time, but if anyone has any questions that we didn't have a chance to get to, we'll be sending out an email from Events OSRL with the recording of this seminar, so you can share it with any of your colleagues, as well as the links that Tristan shared on this slide here. And if you have any questions, you can just respond to that email. Tristan, did you have anything to say in closing?
Yes. Yeah, just a little bit. In-situ burning is a very, very emotive response technique. We think about the fire, we think about the smoke, we think about the damage that could be caused. And we have visceral feelings when it comes to it, very similar to dispersants. However, like all our response techniques, if you take one thing away from this presentation, it's all down to the planning. I don't want anybody to go away and just write off in-situ burning as too complex or too damaging to the environment. There is a place for every response technique that's available to us, and with proper planning and with a proper assessment, we can decide if in-situ burning is right for us. And that's me. Thank you very, very much for your time. My contact details are there at the bottom of the screen. I'm also, you can find them on the OSRL website. Please, if you have any questions, obviously I'm not a super expert when it comes to in-situ burning, but I know people that are. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to get in touch and we will help you and support you as much as we can.
Great, thanks, Tristan. Thanks everyone for coming today. The next seminar we'll be discussing at-sea containment and recovery, and that one takes place on the 12th of May at 2 o'clock. So now that you've registered for the seminar series, you will receive a link to join that seminar and a recording afterwards. Thanks again for joining us, and have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.